Kehoe adjusted his tie as he walked into the Council Embassy building in Geneva. The massive structure looked like something from a dream, with walls that seemed to shift color in the morning light. 50 years had passed since first contact with the Galactic Council, and Earth had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The ambassador smiled at the Valdorian secretary behind the curved desk. The alien's blue skin shimmered as she nodded back. Kehoe had learned their customs well over his 10 years as Earth's lead diplomat. Trust was everything in galactic politics, or so the Council had taught them. Ambassador Veltar is waiting. For you in Conference Room 7, the secretary said in perfect English. Her voice had a musical quality that still amazed Kehoe after all these years. Kehoe made his way through corridors filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. Earth was lucky to be part of this great confederation of 847 species. At least, that's what everyone believed. His daughter Bora was already in the conference room when he arrived. She sat at a table covered with translation devices and data, tablets. As Earth's chief xenolinguist, she had mastered 17 alien languages in just 5 years. Her talent for understanding other species had made her invaluable to the diplomatic mission. "Morning, Dad," she said without looking up from her work. "I've been going through the mining proposals all night. Something feels off about the wording." Ambassador. Veltar entered the room before Kehoe could respond. The tall, gray-skinned council representative moved with the fluid grace typical of his species. His large black eyes showed no emotion as he took his seat across from them. "Ambassador Kehoe, Linguist Bora," Veltar began, his voice flat and formal. "The Council has reviewed Earth's latest resource reports. We are pleased with your cooperation." Kehoe nodded. "Earth is honored to contribute to our mutual defense and prosperity." "Indeed," Veltar continued, "which brings us to today's matter. The Council requires exclusive mining rights to Earth's rare Earth deposits. Recent surveys show your world contains materials essential for our defensive technologies." Bora looked up from her tablets. "All deposits? That seems extensive for defensive needs." Veltar's expression didn't change. "The galaxy faces many threats. The Council must be prepared." After the meeting, Kehoe walked to his office feeling uneasy. Something in Veltar's tone had been different today, more urgent. He found Taemin waiting for him, holding a data pad with shaking hands. Taemin had worked as a data analyst for the embassy for 3 years. He was quiet, careful, and had an eye for details that others missed. Right now, he looked terrified. "Sir, I need to show you something," Taemin whispered. "I've been monitoring communication frequencies like you asked. I found something that shouldn't exist." He activated the data pad, showing complex waveforms and signal patterns. "These are encrypted. Transmissions between Council ships in orbit. I managed to decode fragments." Kehoe studied the patterns. "What am I looking at?" "Resource calculations, sir, but not for mining, for complete extraction. Every mineral, every element, everything down to the planet's core, and population estimates. For relocation." The words hit Kehoe like ice water. "Relocation!" Taemin's voice barely rose above a whisper. "According to these transmissions, Earth is classified as a harvest world. Full extraction scheduled to begin in 20 years. 3 floors below, Nari was having her own moment of horrible realization. As Earth's liaison to the Council's engineering division, she had access to their technical databases. She had always wondered why their shared technology seemed so primitive compared to what the Council ships obviously possessed. Today, she had finally gotten clearance to inspect a Council vessel. The technology she found there was at least 300 years ahead of anything they had shared with Earth. Faster-than-light communication, matter converters, weapons that could crack planets like eggs. "Why keep this from us?" she muttered, recording everything she could with hidden cameras. Unless... The answer came to her with sickening clarity. They weren't allies. They were livestock being kept calm until slaughter time. Meanwhile, Bora was discovering the truth in her own way. Working late in the linguistics lab, she had been analyzing the subtle patterns in Council speech. Each species had their own way of speaking, their own emotional tells. She had become expert at reading the tiny signs that revealed what aliens really meant. Tonight, she was reviewing recordings of every conversation between Council members and humans over the past year. Pattern by pattern, she built a picture that made her stomach turn. Every Council representative showed the same micro-expressions when talking to humans, the same tiny facial movements, the same vocal stress patterns. She had seen these exact combinations before, in her studies of predatory species talking to prey. The Council wasn't hiding their contempt. They were hiding their hunger. Her hands trembled as she cross-referenced her findings with xenobiological databases. Every single Council species was either carnivorous or had a history of consuming other intelligent beings. The peaceful Confederation was actually a galaxy-spanning pack of predators. At 3 a.m., Bora's secure communicator buzzed. It was her father. "Conference room 12. Now, bring everything." She found Kehoe, Taemin, and Nari already there. The lights were dimmed, and the room's security systems were offline. Her father looked like he had aged 10 years in one day. "We have a problem," Kehoe began. "A big one." They shared their discoveries in hushed voices. Resource extraction plans, hidden technology, biological profiles suggesting humans were seen as food, not friends. Each piece of evidence built on the others until the terrible picture was complete. "How long?" Nari asked. "Taemin's intercepts suggest 20 years until they begin the harvest," Kehoe replied. "But that timeline could change if they suspect we know." Bora felt sick. 8 billion people. They're planning to kill 8 billion people. "Not kill," Taemin corrected quietly. "Relocate. The transmissions mention processing facilities in the Outer Rim. I think they plan to keep us alive for other purposes." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans weren't just being marked for death. They were being prepared for something worse. "What do we do?" Nari whispered. Kehoe stood up slowly. "We do what humans have always done when faced with extinction. We survive. But first, we need to make sure they never see us coming." Over the next few days, the four of them carefully reached out to trusted contacts. Scientists who had noticed discrepancies in Council data. Military leaders who had questioned why Earth's defenses remained so primitive. Engineers who had wondered about the gaps in shared technology. Within a week, they had identified 200 people across 50 countries who suspected something was wrong. Within a month, that number had grown to 2,000. All of them worked in positions that gave them access to Council operations or Earth's infrastructure. The group called themselves Silent Dawn. Their mission was simple: evacuate humanity. Before the Council realized their prey had discovered the trap. But 8 billion people couldn't just disappear overnight. It would take years of careful planning, massive resources, and perfect secrecy. One mistake would doom everyone. Kehoe stood in his office late one night, looking out at the lights of Geneva below. Somewhere up in orbit, Council ships were monitoring every communication, every movement, every sign of human activity. They were being watched by creatures that saw them as nothing more than resources to be harvested. But the Council had made one critical error. They had assumed humans would remain helpless and trusting until the end. They had forgotten that prey animals, when cornered, could become incredibly dangerous. Bora entered the office carrying a sealed folder. The linguist network is established. We have people in every major council facility on Earth. When we're ready to move, we'll know everything they're planning. Kehoe nodded. And the timeline? 18 months, she replied. That's how long we have to evacuate 8 billion people. Without anyone noticing, father and daughter stood together in the darkness, looking up at stars that no longer seemed friendly. Somewhere out there was a new home for humanity. They just had to live long enough to find it. The greatest exodus in human history was about to begin. Wu Jin floated in zero gravity inside the asteroid mining facility, but he wasn't looking for minerals. Hidden behind the legitimate operation, teams of workers were building something the Council would never expect. Escape ships designed to carry thousands of people across the galaxy. The asteroid belt provided perfect cover. Council monitors saw exactly what they expected to see. Humans mining resources for their technological development. They had no idea that every mining platform was actually a shipyard, and every cargo transport was being converted into an evacuation vessel. "How many more do we need?" asked his assistant Jay Wu as they inspected the latest completed ship. 2,000, Wu Jin replied, running his hand along the hull plating. "Maybe more. 8 billion people don't travel light. Each ship had to be perfect. They would carry families who might never see Earth again. The artificial gravity systems, life support, and suspended animation pods all had to function flawlessly for journeys that could last decades. Back on Earth, Yunji was solving the problem of keeping people alive during those long journeys. In her laboratory beneath Seoul National University, she had spent 8 months perfecting suspended animation technology. The Council had shared basic life extension methods, but nothing suitable for interstellar travel. "Test subject 17 is stable," her assistant Hyo Jin reported. "Metabolic rate down to 2% of normal. Brain activity minimal but consistent." Yunji nodded, watching the volunteer sleep peacefully in the prototype pod. They had been testing on volunteers for months now, gradually extending the duration. The longest successful test had lasted 6 months with no side effects. "How long do you think the journeys will take?" Hyo Jin asked. "Years," Yunji said quietly. "Maybe decades. We need to be able to keep people safe for as long as it takes to find a new home." The volunteer in the pod was Yunji's own brother, Min-Soo. He had insisted on being the first long-term test subject. If the technology failed, he wanted his sister to learn from his sacrifice, rather than risk strangers' lives. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was conducting the most dangerous part of the operation, stealing Council technology. As a maintenance worker with access to Council facilities, he had spent months mapping their security systems and identifying opportunities. Tonight, he was breaking into a Council research station orbiting Earth's moon. The station contained advanced propulsion systems that could cut travel time from decades to years. But getting caught would mean death, and worse, exposure of the entire operation. "Remember," whispered his partner Sang-ho through the communicator, You have exactly 27 minutes before the security cycle resets. Hyunwoo moved through the station's corridors like a ghost. His stolen access codes got him past the first 3 security barriers. The 4th required a biometric scan from a council species. Fortunately, they had prepared for this. The severed finger of a dead council engineer, preserved in a special container, provided the necessary genetic signature. Hyunwoo tried not to think about how Silent Dawn had obtained it. Inside the research lab, he found exactly what they needed: complete technical specifications for Council faster-than-light drives. The technology was incredibly advanced, but human engineers had been reverse engineering Council systems for months. They could build these engines given time and resources. Package secured, he whispered into his communicator. Coming home. So Young had perhaps the most challenging job of all, keeping the Council convinced that everything was normal. As Earth's chief statistician, she provided regular reports on human population, industrial output, and resource consumption. Every report had to show steady growth and development, never hinting that preparations for departure were underway. She sat in her office, carefully crafting false data that would satisfy Council oversight. Population reports showed normal birth and death rates, hiding the fact that millions of people were already being moved to evacuation staging areas. Industrial reports showed steady metal production, concealing that most of it was going into ship construction. The latest census data looks good, her assistant Kyung-min reported. All numbers within expected parameters. So Young smiled grimly. Good. The Council likes predictable prey. The hardest part was maintaining the illusion while actually reducing Earth's population. People had to disappear gradually in ways that looked natural. Some were reported as moving to remote areas for research projects. Others were listed as volunteers for long-term space missions. Families with children were the hardest to relocate without raising suspicion. Her computer chimed, with an incoming message from Wu Jin. Another 50 ships were ready for passengers. That meant they could begin evacuating the next group, 500,000 people from the Pacific region. But even as the evacuation accelerated, everyone knew they were racing against time. Council ships patrolled the solar system constantly, their sensors watching for any unusual activity. One mistake, one suspicious reading, and 8 billion lives would be forfeit. Nari was working on solving that problem. Using her access to Council monitoring systems, she had identified blind spots in their sensor coverage, windows of time when ships could launch undetected, hidden behind asteroid fields, or using the interference from solar flares. Next launch. Window is in 6 hours, she reported to the coordination team. Solar storm will mask the signatures of 12 departing ships. The timing had to be perfect. Ships launched too early would be spotted by Council patrols. Too late, and they would miss the protective interference of the solar storm. Each ship carried 30,000 people in suspended animation. Families were kept together when possible, but sometimes children had to be separated from parents to fit the evacuation schedules. The lucky ones would be reunited in the new colonies. Others might sleep for decades before finding each other again. Tae-min monitored Council communications constantly, watching for any sign that their activities had been discovered. The aliens continued their normal routines, discussing human development and resource allocation as if they were managing livestock. They still don't suspect anything, he reported during the daily coordination meeting. Latest transmissions show they're planning to begin preparation protocols in 18 months, right on schedule. Bo-Ra had been working with resistance, cells around the world, establishing communication networks that could operate without Council detection. Each cell knew only what it needed to know. If one was discovered, it couldn't compromise the others. "The linguist network is ready," she told her father. "Every major population center has evacuation coordinators in place. When we give the signal, they can begin moving people within hours." Kehoe looked at the massive wall display showing evacuation progress. Red dots marked completed evacuations. Yellow showed areas in progress. Blue indicated regions still waiting for transport. Most of the world was still blue. "How many have we moved so far?" he asked. 2 million, Wu Jin replied, "less than 1% of the total population." The number was both impressive and terrifying. In 6 months, Silent Dawn had successfully evacuated 2 million people without the Council noticing. But that left 7.9998 billion still on Earth, still in danger, still depending on the success of the most audacious rescue operation in human history. Dong Ha entered the command center carrying urgent news from the outer colonies. "First wave has reached Kepler 442b. The planet is habitable. They're beginning construction of permanent settlements." A cheer went up from the coordination team. For the first time since discovering the Council's true intentions, they had proof that humanity could survive beyond Earth. There was hope, but hope came with a price. Each successful evacuation made the remaining task seem more impossible. Moving 2 million people had required months of planning and perfect execution. Moving the remaining billions would require miracles. "The Council is requesting updated population surveys," So Young reported. "They want detailed demographic data for each region." Kehoe felt his stomach tighten. More detailed surveys would make it harder to hide the missing populations. They were running out of time to maintain the deception. "How long can you delay them?" "Maybe 2 weeks," So Young replied. "After that, they'll expect the data or they'll send their own survey teams. 2 weeks to evacuate 8 billion people. It was impossible, but they had to try. The alternative was extinction." Nari was already calculating the requirements. "We need to increase the launch rate by a factor of 50. That means using every ship simultaneously, Council monitoring or not." "They'll see us," Taman protested. "We can't hide that level of activity." "Then we don't hide it," Kehoe said quietly. "We make it look like something else." Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Kehoe walked to the display showing Earth's orbital traffic patterns. "What if the Council thinks we're having a planetary emergency, natural disaster, pandemic, something that requires mass evacuations to orbital stations?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. If the Council believed humans were fleeing a disaster rather than fleeing them, they might not interfere immediately. It would buy precious time for the final evacuations. "It could work," Bora said slowly. "But we'd need a convincing disaster, something that would justify moving the entire population off-world." "Solar radiation burst," suggested Yunji. "We could fake data show." Jae Sung stared at the massive holographic projection of New York City displayed in the underground command center. From space, it looked completely normal. People walked the streets, traffic moved through intersections, lights glowed in windows. The Council's orbital sensors would detect nothing unusual. The truth was that New York City was completely empty. Every person shown in the projection was an artificial intelligence construct. Every car a computer-generated image. Every light a carefully programmed illusion. The real city lay abandoned, its 8 million residents already sleeping in evacuation ships heading for distant stars. "How many cities do we have online?" asked Ye Jin, the coordination leader for the final evacuation phase. 47 major urban centers, Jae Sung replied, manipulating the holographic controls. The AI systems are running perfectly. From orbit, Earth looks like it has a thriving population of 8 billion people. The deception was incredibly complex. Satellites had to show the right heat signatures. Communication networks had to generate normal traffic patterns, and electrical grids had to maintain typical usage levels. Every detail had to be perfect because the Council watched everything. Meanwhile, the real evacuation continued at a frantic pace. Yejin oversaw the movement of entire nations, coordinating with Silent Dawn cells across 6 continents. Each group had mere hours to reach designated pickup points before their turn in the evacuation sequence. Transport Fleet 7 reports. Successful boarding completion, her assistant Sujin announced. 200,000 people from the Delhi region are in suspended animation and ready for departure. Yejin marked another region as complete on her tactical display. The numbers were staggering. They were moving 20 million people per day, using every ship in the secret fleet. It was the largest migration in human history, and it had to happen without the Council noticing. The evacuation followed a carefully planned sequence. Remote areas went first, where missing populations would be harder to detect. Urban centers were saved for last, relying on the holographic deception to hide their emptiness. Families were evacuated together when possible, but the desperate timeline meant many would be separated until they reached the colony worlds. Minho commanded the most dangerous part of the operation, the skeleton crew remaining on Earth to maintain the illusion. His team of 3,000 volunteers would stay behind until the very last moment, keeping critical systems running and feeding false data to Council monitoring stations. The hydroelectric plants need to show normal output levels, he told his chief engineer, Young-Soo. If power consumption drops too quickly, the Council will investigate. Young-Soo nodded grimly. We're running automated systems at maximum to simulate normal usage. The computers are using as much power as a city of 2 million people. Every abandoned facility had to maintain the appearance of normal operation. Factories ran empty production lines, office buildings kept their lights on scheduled timers, and transportation systems moved empty vehicles along predetermined routes. The Council's sensors would detect all the expected signs of a thriving human civilization. But maintaining the deception was getting harder each day. Ha Young, monitoring Council communications, had detected increased attention from their overseers. The aliens were asking more questions, requesting additional data, showing signs of growing suspicion. They're starting to wonder about our resource. Consumption patterns, she reported to Kehoe during a secure communication session. Some Council analysts have noticed minor discrepancies in our industrial output reports. Kehoe felt his stomach clench. How minor? Small enough that they're investigating rather than acting immediately, Ha-Young replied. But if they send inspection teams to major industrial centers, they'll discover the truth in hours. The timeline was accelerating beyond their control. Originally, they had planned to maintain the deception for 6 months, while evacuating the A population gradually. Now they had weeks at most before Council suspicion turned into action. Bo-Ra was facing her own impossible choice. The advanced scout ships had reached 3 potentially habitable worlds, but they needed detailed surveys to determine which could support large populations. As Earth's chief xenolinguist, her skills were essential for communicating with any native species they might encounter. The transport leaves tomorrow, her father told her during a private meeting. You need to be on it. I can't leave, Bo-Ra protested. The evacuation isn't complete. People still need coordination, communication support. Other people can handle that, Kehoe replied firmly. But only you can handle first contact protocols if we encounter alien civilizations in our new homes. The Kiabadidad argument continued for hours, but both of them knew the truth. Bora's expertise would be crucial for humanity's survival in their new homes. Her presence on Earth during the final evacuation would be helpful, but not essential. Meanwhile, the colony ships already in deep space were establishing humanity's first permanent settlements beyond Earth. The reports were encouraging. 3 worlds offered breathable atmospheres, abundant water, and no signs of hostile native life. But establishing sustainable colonies would take decades, and they needed every advantage they could get. Du Yan was preparing the most important transport of all, the ship carrying Earth's complete cultural and genetic archives. Every book, every piece of music, every work of art humanity had ever created was being stored in quantum storage devices. DNA samples from every plant and animal species were preserved in cryogenic systems. "We're bringing Earth with us," she told her team as they loaded the final archive containers. "Even if we never see our home again, we'll make sure human culture survives." The archive ship also carried something more precious than all the art and genetic samples combined: detailed technical specifications for rebuilding human civilization. Manufacturing processes, scientific knowledge, technological blueprints, everything needed to transform raw worlds into new homes for humanity. Sungmin was responsible for the most delicate task of the entire operation: sabotaging Council monitoring systems without being detected. As a maintenance technician with access to their sensor networks, he had spent months placing small devices that could disable key systems on command. "All sabotage packages are in position," he reported. "When we activate them, the Council will lose monitoring capability for approximately 6 hours. 6 hours to complete the final evacuations and disappear. It would have to be enough." But the Council was not entirely oblivious to what was happening. Zintal, the Council overseer for the Sol sector, had been reviewing human activity reports for weeks. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't identify exactly what. "Human industrial output has decreased by 3% over the past month," he told his aide. "Population reports show normal growth, but resource consumption is down." His aide, a younger council member named Kex Vel, reviewed the data carefully. "Perhaps they are becoming more efficient in their resource usage." "Impossible," Zintal replied. "Primitive species don't suddenly become more efficient. They become more efficient when they're forced to by scarcity or external pressure." The conversation was being monitored by Taemin, who immediately transmitted a warning to the evacuation command center. The Council was starting to connect the dots. They had perhaps days before their deception was discovered. Ji-Wan was working frantically to eliminate evidence of human space settlements throughout the solar system. Every research station, mining platform, and orbital facility had to be destroyed or made to look abandoned. The Council could not discover that humans had been building an extensive space infrastructure in preparation for departure. "Detonation charges are placed on all platforms," she reported. "When we trigger the sequence, it will look like a cascading failure from solar radiation damage." The plan was to make it appear that a massive solar storm had damaged human space infrastructure, forcing the evacuation to orbital stations. Those stations would then malfunction and drift into deep space, taking the human population with them. From the Council's perspective, humanity would simply disappear in a tragic accident. By the time they investigated thoroughly, the evacuation ships would be light years away and impossible to track. But everything depended on perfect timing. The final evacuation phase had to begin before the Council's suspicion turned into action. The holographic deception had to hold until the last ship departed. The sabotage systems had to activate at precisely the right moment. As Ye-Jin watched the evacuation progress displays, she realized they were attempting something that should have been impossible: moving 8 billion people across interstellar distances without advanced technology, unlimited resources, or help from other species. It was the greatest undertaking in human history, attempted under the worst possible conditions. Yet somehow, it was working. Each day brought millions more people to safety. Each successful ship launch brought humanity closer to survival. The Council's deception was holding, the technology was functioning, and the colony worlds were proving habitable. Minho received the final evacuation order as dawn broke over Geneva. His skeleton crew had maintained the illusion for 9 months. But now it was time to go. The last human transport was waiting in orbit, ready to carry them to safety. All systems are configured for automatic operation. Du Yan stood in the command center of the final evacuation ship, watching Earth shrink to a blue dot behind them. In the cargo holds below, the last 3 million humans slept in suspended animation pods. The cultural archives, genetic samples, and technological blueprints of their entire civilization were stored in quantum storage devices that hummed quietly in the darkness. "All systems show green," reported her navigator, Sung Ho. "We're clear of the inner solar system and accelerating toward the designated jump point." But their escape was only beginning. Behind them, Sung Min was preparing to activate the systems that would make their departure look like a natural disaster. The Council had to believe that humanity had been wiped out by cosmic forces, not rescued by their own ingenuity. Sung Min sat alone in a hidden control room deep beneath the Swiss mountains. Banks of computers around him monitored every Council sensor in the solar system. With a few keystrokes, he could disable their monitoring network and trigger the final phase of humanity's deception. "Initiating solar storm simulation," he whispered into his communicator. "All stations prepare for electromagnetic pulse." Across Earth's surface, hidden devices began generating massive electromagnetic pulses that mimicked the effects of a catastrophic solar flare. Power grids failed in cascading. Blackouts. Communication networks went silent. The holographic projections of bustling cities flickered and died, leaving only empty streets and darkened buildings. From the Council's perspective, human civilization had just been destroyed by a natural disaster. Zintal was reviewing routine, monitoring reports when alarms began sounding throughout the Council observation station. His aide, Kexvel, rushed into his office carrying urgent data readings. "Massive solar activity in the Sol system," Kexvel reported breathlessly. "Electromagnetic. Radiation levels are off the charts. All human communications have ceased." Zintal studied the sensor data with growing alarm. The solar flare was enormous, far beyond anything they had seen in this system before. The electromagnetic pulse would have fried every piece of electronic equipment on Earth's surface. "What about the human orbital facilities?" he asked. "Also silent," Kexvel replied. "It appears the radiation surge damaged their space-based infrastructure as well." Within hours, Council emergency response teams were dispatched to investigate the disaster. They found exactly what Sung Min had programmed them to find: a dead world with no signs of life, its technology destroyed by cosmic radiation. But the investigation teams never detected the ships carrying 8 billion humans toward distant stars. Those vessels had been carefully designed to be invisible to Council sensors, using technology stolen and adapted over months of preparation. Du Yan's ship was among the last to reach the first jump point. Behind them, 3,000 other evacuation vessels stretched across space in a convoy that spanned millions of kilometers. Each ship carried between 10,000 and 50,000 people, along with everything needed to establish new colonies. "Jump calculations are complete," Seong-ho announced. "All ships report ready for faster-than-light transition." The jump technology had been reverse-engineered from stolen Council designs, but human engineers had made crucial improvements. Their version was faster, more efficient, and completely undetectable by standard Council sensors. The aliens would never be able to track where humanity had gone. "Execute jump sequence," Do-Yan ordered. Space folded around them as the ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel. One moment they were in Earth's solar system. The next, they were light years away, racing toward worlds that could become humanity's new homes. Back in Council space, the investigation into Earth's disaster was proceeding exactly as planned. Teams of alien scientists swarmed over the empty planet, finding no trace of human survivors. The electromagnetic pulse had been so complete that even buried installations showed signs of catastrophic damage. "Preliminary analysis suggests total population loss," reported the lead investigator to Zintal. "No survivors detected in any urban centers or remote facilities." Zintal felt an unusual emotion as he reviewed the reports. Disappointment. The humans had been scheduled for harvest in just 18 months. Their sudden extinction meant the loss of valuable resources and biological material. "What about their space-based population?" he asked. "Surely some humans were off-world when the disaster occurred." "Negative," the investigator replied. "All orbital facilities show signs of radiation damage and catastrophic decompression. Any humans aboard would have died within minutes." The Council had rules about natural disasters affecting harvest worlds. If a species was wiped out by cosmic forces before scheduled extraction, the event was classified as acceptable loss, and the world was marked for later mineral extraction. No one questioned whether the disaster might have been artificially created. 3 weeks after the solar disaster, Council salvage teams arrived to begin preliminary resource surveys. They found a planet rich in rare minerals but completely devoid of life. The electromagnetic pulse had been so powerful that even bacteria in the deep ocean had been killed. What they didn't find were the hidden facilities where Sung-min and his team had coordinated the evacuation. Those installations had been carefully destroyed, their wreckage designed to look like radiation damage. Every piece of evidence that might suggest human involvement had been eliminated. Sung-min himself had escaped on the very last shuttle, timing his departure to occur during the artificial electromagnetic storm. Council sensors detected the shuttle's destruction when it crashed into Earth's moon, never realizing it had actually performed a slingshot maneuver that sent it racing toward the colony ships. Meanwhile, the human convoy was making unprecedented time toward their destination worlds. The improved faster-than-light drives allowed them to cross distances that should have taken decades in just months. By the time the Council completed their investigation of Earth, humanity would be establishing permanent settlements dozens of light years away. Do-Yan studied star charts in her command center, calculating arrival times for each destination world. Kepler 442b should receive its first colonists in 6 months, she told her navigation team. Gliese 606C will take 8 months, and Wolf 1061C will take almost a year. 3 worlds, each capable of supporting human life. Even if one colony failed, humanity would survive on the others. They had learned the lesson of putting all their eggs in one basket. The cultural preservation team was already planning how to rebuild human civilization on the new worlds. Libraries would be established first, followed by universities and research centers. The genetic archives would allow them to recreate Earth's biodiversity, giving each world its own version of terrestrial life. But most importantly, they would remember what had happened to Earth. Future generations would know how the Council had betrayed humanity's trust, how they had planned to harvest billions of innocent people. That knowledge would shape how humans interacted with other species, ensuring they would never again be caught unprepared. As the weeks passed, Council interest in the Sol system began to fade. The disaster had been thoroughly investigated, the cause determined to be natural cosmic radiation, and the resource extraction timeline adjusted accordingly. Without a living population to harvest, Earth was just another dead rock to be mined at their convenience. Xintal filed his final report on the human extinction event with little ceremony. In 50,000 years of galactic conquest, the Council had seen hundreds of species disappear due to natural disasters, wars, or ecological collapse. The humans were just another entry in a long list of failed civilizations. "Recommendations for the Sol system?" asked his aide. "Standard mineral extraction. Protocol," Xintal replied. "Begin operations in 50 years, after the radiation levels have decreased to safe working conditions." Neither of them realized they had just witnessed the most successful escape in galactic history. 8 billion people had vanished from under the Council's nose, taking with them everything needed to rebuild their civilization elsewhere. The greatest predator species in the galaxy had been completely fooled by their intended prey. The evacuation ships continued their journey through deep space, their passengers sleeping peacefully in suspended animation. They carried the hopes and dreams of an entire species, along with the determination to never again allow themselves to be victims. In her private quarters aboard the archive ship, Do-Yon reviewed the final messages from Earth. Scientists, artists, teachers, and ordinary citizens had recorded thousands of hours of video letters for future generations, messages of hope, love, and defiance that would inspire humans for centuries to come. One message from an elderly man in Seoul particularly moved her. "We are leaving our home, but we carry it with us in our hearts. Whatever world our children inherit, it will be built with the best of what humanity has learned. We will be stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever challenges await us among the stars." The Council thought they had witnessed the end of humanity. In reality, they had witnessed its transformation from a single-world species into something far more dangerous. A spacefaring civilization with no home to lose and nothing left to fear. As the convoy disappeared into the vast darkness between stars, Earth continued its lonely orbit around the sun. The empty cities slowly crumble. 50 years had passed since the Great Exodus, and Taimin could hardly believe he was still alive to see humanity's remarkable transformation. Now elderly and confined to a mobility chair, he spent his days in the Deep Space Monitoring Station, orbiting Kepler 442b, listening to Council communications with the same dedication he had shown half a century ago. The galaxy had changed dramatically since Earth's destruction. The Council continued their harvest operations across hundreds of worlds, but something was different. Ships were disappearing, entire species were vanishing without trace, and strange reports kept filtering through Council communication networks about mysterious interventions that saved species from harvest. "Grandfather, you need to see this," said his granddaughter Il-sung, rushing into the monitoring station with a data tablet clutched in her hands. Tae-min smiled at the young woman. Il-sung had been born among the stars, part of the first generation, to grow up knowing only their new worlds. She had inherited her grandfather's analytical mind but possessed something he never had: complete freedom from fear of the Council. "What have you discovered?" he asked, reviewing the data she presented. "3 more Council harvest fleets have gone missing," Il-sung reported. "That makes 17 in the past 5 years. Each time they arrive at a target world to find the entire population has vanished without trace." Tae-min studied the patterns carefully. The missing populations, the disappeared ships, the growing Council paranoia about unknown forces operating in the galaxy. It all pointed to one conclusion that filled him with pride. "We're not the only ones who escaped," he said quietly. Across the human colonies, similar realizations were dawning. Humanity had scattered across dozens of star systems, establishing hidden settlements that remained completely invisible to Council detection. Each colony developed independently, using the cultural and technological archives to rebuild civilization according to their own vision. Erin commanded one of humanity's greatest achievements, the first completely invisible starship fleet. Using technology that had been refined far beyond anything the Council possessed, her ships could travel through space without leaving any trace of their passage. "Stealth field generators are operating at 100% efficiency," reported her chief engineer, Dong-woo. "Council sensors show no indication of our presence." The human fleet consisted of 300 vessels, each one a masterpiece of engineering that combined Council technology with human innovation. They were faster, more maneuverable, and completely undetectable by any known sensor system. But Erin's fleet wasn't used for conquest or revenge. Instead, they had become something the Council had never imagined: guardian angels for species facing harvest. Intelligence reports indicate the Valdari homeworld is scheduled for harvest in 6 months, her tactical officer So-min reported. Population approximately 2 billion. Council estimates suggest complete extraction within 18 months. Erin studied the tactical display showing the Valdari system. It was a beautiful world with advanced civilization and rich cultural heritage. In 6 months, the Council would arrive to begin the process of turning 2 billion sentient beings into resources. "Begin evacuation planning," she ordered. "We're going to save them." The human rescue operations had become incredibly sophisticated over the decades. Teams of specialists would infiltrate target worlds months before Council arrival, establishing contact with local governments and explaining the true nature of the Galactic Confederation. Dong-woo had perfected the art of building hidden evacuation infrastructure on alien worlds. Using human stealth technology, his teams could construct massive shipyards and evacuation facilities without detection. When the time came to evacuate, entire populations could disappear in a matter of days. "The Valdari have accepted our offer of assistance," So-min reported after a covert diplomatic mission. "Their leaders understand the situation and are prepared to coordinate evacuation efforts." But not every species was easy to save. Many had been so thoroughly indoctrinated by Council propaganda that they refused to believe the truth about their fate. Others lacked the technological infrastructure needed for large-scale evacuation. Il-sung had become one of humanity's leading experts on Council psychology and operational patterns. Her analysis had revealed something remarkable. The Galactic Empire was beginning to show signs of strain. Resource extraction efficiency has declined by 30% over the past decade, she reported to the Colonial Leadership Council. The Council is harvesting fewer species and extracting less material per operation. The reason was simple. Too many species were disappearing before harvest could begin. The mysterious interventions were disrupting carefully planned extraction schedules, forcing the Council to expend more resources on investigation and security. Meanwhile, other extinct species were beginning to make contact with human colonies. The Zephyrians had faked their own destruction 1,500 years ago. The colony had been hiding in deep space for over 3 millennia. Each species had its own story of escape, but all shared the common experience of being deceived by Council promises. "We're not alone," reported the human ambassador to the Hidden Alliance, J-Ho. "There are at least 40 species that have successfully escaped Council harvest. Combined population exceeds 50 billion beings." The Alliance called itself the Silent Coalition, species that had learned the value of staying hidden while helping others escape the Council's reach. They shared technology, resources, and intelligence, gradually building a network that spanned the galaxy. But the most remarkable development was happening within human space itself, freed from the constraints of a single world and the threat of extinction. Humanity had evolved in ways that amazed even their own scientists. Yunji, now ancient but still brilliant, marveled at what her grandchildren had accomplished. "We've developed technologies that surpass anything the Council possesses," she told the Research Council on New Terra. "Faster than light communication, matter conversion, even primitive time manipulation." The isolation had forced humanity to become completely self-sufficient. Without the ability to trade with other species or rely on external resources, human colonies had developed incredibly advanced recycling, manufacturing, and energy generation. Systems Young-Ho, a second-generation engineer born on Gliesa 667C, had invented replication technology that could create complex materials from basic atomic components. "We can literally build anything we need from space dust and stellar radiation," he explained to visiting colonial delegates. The advancement wasn't just technological. Human society had evolved beyond anything Earth had ever known. Without the threat of harvest hanging over them, without the need to maintain the illusion of primitive development, humans had created philosophical and political systems that maximized individual freedom while ensuring collective survival. But perhaps the most important development was psychological. The generation born among the stars had no fear of the Council. They saw the Galactic Empire not as an unstoppable force, but as a failing system that could be defeated. "Why are we hiding?" Il-sung asked during a colony leadership meeting. "We have superior technology, vast resources, and allies throughout the galaxy. The Council's power is built on deception and fear. What happens when we remove those foundations?" The question sparked intense debate across human space. For 50 years, survival had depended on remaining invisible, but humanity had grown strong. During their exile, perhaps strong enough to abandon stealth in favor of open resistance. Nari, now serving as Chief Strategic Advisor for the Colonial Confederation, had been studying Council military capabilities for decades. "Their fleets are powerful but not invincible," she reported. "More importantly, they're scattered across the galaxy, maintaining control over thousands of worlds. They couldn't concentrate their forces quickly enough to respond to a coordinated attack." But attack wasn't what the younger generation had in mind. They were thinking bigger, more ambitious, more fundamentally human in their approach to the problem. "What if we simply told everyone the truth?" suggested Bojin, Il-sung's cousin, and a specialist in galactic communications. "All at once to every species in Council space. Show them what the Council really is. Prove that escape is possible. Demonstrate that resistance works." The idea was audacious beyond anything the first generation had imagined. Instead of saving species one at a time, they would attempt to liberate the entire galaxy simultaneously. Wu Jin's grandson, Min Jun, had inherited his grandfather's engineering. Brilliance along with the fearlessness of the starborn generation. We could build a transmission array powerful enough to reach every inhabited world simultaneously, he proposed. Broadcast the truth faster than the Council could suppress. The technology existed. Human colonies had developed communication systems that operated outside normal space-time, allowing instantaneous contact across galactic distances. A sufficiently powerful array could penetrate every communication network in Council space. The debates continued. Monitoring stations throughout human space reported increasing Council activity. Harvest operations were being suspended, investigation fleets were patrolling previously secure areas, and Council leadership was issuing emergency protocols. They know something has happened. Yujin crouched in the maintenance tunnel beneath the Council harvesting facility on Zerion Prime, watching through her scanner as processing equipment prepared to begin the systematic destruction of an entire civilization. Above her, 2 billion. Zerioni waited in detention centers, unaware that their species was about to be reduced to component materials for Council manufacturing. The human rescue team had been on Zerion for 3 months, building evacuation infrastructure while maintaining complete invisibility. Tonight, they would attempt something that had never been tried before, saving an entire species while making the Council believe they had been successfully harvested. "Stealth field generators are in position," whispered her second-in-command, Kyung-ho, through the subspace communicator. "All Zerioni detention centers are now shielded from Council sensors." Yujin smiled grimly. Human technology had advanced far beyond anything the Council possessed, but this operation would test their capabilities to the limit. They had to evacuate 2 billion beings, destroy the harvesting facility, and escape the system before Council reinforcements arrived. "Begin Phase 1, she ordered. Across the planet, human infiltration teams activated holographic projectors that would make empty detention centers appear full of prisoners. Simultaneously, evacuation ships began materializing inside the stealth fields, ready to receive the rescued Zerioni. The operation had been planned for years by Seok Ho, humanity's leading expert in large-scale rescue operations. From his command center aboard the invisible fleet carrier Silent Promise, he coordinated the movements of over 50 ships and 300 human operators. "Evacuation progress shows green across all sites," reported his tactical officer, Mi Young. "First wave of Zerioni are entering suspended animation pods now." The Zerioni had been prepared for this moment through months of careful contact with human agents. Unlike many species, they had quickly understood the truth about the Council and eagerly cooperated with evacuation efforts. Their advanced technology and disciplined society made them ideal candidates for rescue. But saving the Zerioni was only part of humanity's growing campaign against the Council. Across 3 galactic sectors, human teams were conducting similar operations, gradually bleeding away the Empire's harvest targets before extraction could begin. Jun-ho commanded the intelligence division that made these operations possible. His network of human agents had infiltrated Council facilities throughout the galaxy, providing advance warning of harvest schedules and detailed intelligence on Council military capabilities. Latest reports confirm 17 successful evacuations. In the past year, he briefed the Colonial Leadership Council. "We've saved over 30 billion beings from harvest, and the Council still doesn't know we exist." The intelligence was revealing fascinating information about the Council's true nature. They weren't the ancient galactic civilization they pretended to be. Instead, they were the descendants of a species that had been harvested themselves millennia ago. They had become the very predators that once threatened them, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation that had consumed the galaxy for 50,000 years. Council leadership consists of beings who have been artificially extended through harvested biological material, Junho explained. They're essentially parasites, feeding off the life force of other species to maintain their own existence. This discovery had profound implications for resistance strategy. The Council wasn't just evil. They were trapped in a system that required constant expansion and consumption. Without regular harvests, their leadership would literally die of old age within decades. Meanwhile, Mi Young was discovering that humanity's isolation had given them an unexpected advantage: immunity to Council pacification technology. Most species that joined the Galactic Confederation were subjected to subtle neural modifications that made them docile and compliant. Humans had never been exposed to these modifications, leaving them completely resistant to Council mental influence. We can move freely through Council space without triggering their psychological control systems, she reported. To their scanners, we appear as just another subject species, but we retain complete free will. This immunity allowed human agents to operate in areas where other resistance members would be detected instantly. They could walk through Council facilities, interact with officials, and access restricted information without raising suspicion. The growing human presence was beginning to have effects the Council couldn't ignore. Harvest quotas were failing across multiple sectors. Species were disappearing without explanation. Most disturbing of all, some harvested populations were somehow escaping from processing facilities after extraction had already begun. Zintal, now Supreme Overseer for the Galactic Northern Sectors, was facing questions from the High Council that he couldn't answer. In his 50 years of service, he had never seen anything like the current pattern of failures. 17 major harvests. Operations have failed in the past year, he reported to the emergency session of Council leadership. In each case, the target population vanished between initial capture and processing. The Council chamber filled with agitated clicking and whistling as representatives from dozens of species expressed their concern. Harvest failures meant resource shortages, which meant the leadership's life extension treatments might be interrupted. "What is your assessment of the threat?" asked High Counselor Vex Nin, her ancient voice crackling with electronic enhancement. "Unknown," Zintal admitted reluctantly. "Our investigation teams find no evidence of resistance activity, no signs of outside intervention, no technology signatures that might explain the disappearances. It was as if the prey species were simply vanishing into thin air, taking with them the resources needed to maintain Council civilization." Some of the more paranoid Council members were beginning to whisper about ancient prophecies that spoke of a great reckoning for those who consumed other worlds. But Zintal was more practical in his concerns. Someone or something was systematically undermining Council operations with technology superior to their own. The question was whether this unknown force was planning more direct action. He was about to get his answer. Back on Zarian Prime, Eugene's team had successfully evacuated 1.8 billion Zarioni and was preparing to extract the final groups. But something had gone wrong with the holographic deception. Council sensors were detecting anomalies in the detention centers. "Security teams are moving toward Sector 7, Kyung-ho reported urgently. "They'll discover the empty cells in less." then 10 minutes. Yujin made a decision that would change the course of the galactic conflict. Instead of aborting the mission and leaving the final Zerioni to their fate, she chose to reveal humanity's presence for the first time in 50 years. All teams abandon stealth protocols, she ordered. Full defensive posture. We're going loud. Human ships throughout the Zerion system suddenly became visible as their stealth fields deactivated. Advanced weapon systems came online, targeting Council installations with precision that shocked the alien observers. "This is Admiral Yu Jin of the Human Colonial Fleet," she broadcast on all Council frequencies. "The Zerioni people are under our protection. Any attempt to harm them will be met with immediate and overwhelming force." The Council forces in the system were completely unprepared for this development. In 50,000 years of galactic dominance, no harvested species had ever returned to challenge them. The appearance of an advanced human fleet was beyond their comprehension. "Impossible," whispered the Council commander overseeing the Zerion harvest. "The humans were destroyed 50 years ago. We investigated personally, but the evidence was undeniable. Human ships were evacuating the remaining Zerioni with technology that made Council vessels look primitive by comparison. Worse, they were broadcasting detailed information about Council harvest operations to every inhabited world within 50 light years. All species in this sector are hereby warned," Yujin continued her broadcast. "The Galactic Council is a predatory organization that harvests sentient beings for resources. Do not trust their promises of confederation or mutual defense. They seek only to consume your worlds and your people." The broadcast included complete documentation of Council harvest operations, intercepted communications discussing species, classification as resources, and technical specifications proving that Council technology was actually stolen from harvested civilizations. Within hours, the transmission had propagated across dozens of star systems. Species that had lived in fear of mysterious disappearances suddenly understood what was happening to their neighbors. Worlds that had been preparing to join the Galactic Confederation realized they were actually volunteering for extinction. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Across 3 sectors of Council space, subject species began rebelling simultaneously. Defense fleets that had been loyal for centuries turned their weapons on Council installations. Entire star systems declared independence and established defensive perimeters. But the most significant development was the emergence of other extinct species from hiding. The human broadcast had included coordinates for safe worlds and instructions for contacting the Silent Coalition. Within days, dozens of species that had been presumed destroyed for millennia began making contact. Xiaoko watched. Il-sung stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of New Terra, watching as sectors of the galaxy turned from red to blue on the tactical map. Each color change represented another star system declaring independence from the Council, another species breaking free from 50 millennia of predation. 100 years had passed since humanity's exodus from Earth. The scared refugees who had fled their homeworld had become the leaders of the largest liberation movement in galactic history. "Status report," Il-sung requested from her tactical staff. 1,237 systems have declared independence, reported Subin, now serving as Chief Diplomatic Coordinator for the Silent Coalition. The Council's effective territory has shrunk by 60% in the past 5 years. The rebellion had spread far beyond anything the humans had imagined possible. Species that had been isolated for millennia were making contact with each other, sharing technology and resources, forming alliances that spanned entire galactic arms. But the most significant development was happening in the Council's core territories. For the first time in recorded history, the Empire was contracting instead of expanding. Without constant harvests to fuel their expansion, Council fleets were being recalled to defend critical installations. Chan Wu, humanity's foremost expert on Council psychology and behavior, had been studying intelligence reports from the Empire's central worlds. What he had discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Council's leadership is beginning to show signs of system collapse, he briefed the Coalition command staff. Without regular harvests to maintain their life extension treatments, the oldest Council members are aging rapidly. The parasitic nature of Council leadership was becoming their greatest weakness. Beings who had lived for thousands of years through harvested biological material were suddenly facing their own mortality as supply lines collapsed. "How long before the leadership structure fails entirely?" asked Il-sung. "Conservative estimates suggest 5 to 10 years, Chan Wu replied. However, dying parasites often become more dangerous as they grow desperate. This desperation was already becoming apparent in Council operations. Instead of the careful, methodical harvests of the past, they were launching brutal raids that stripped worlds bare in a matter of weeks. Entire species were being exterminated rather than processed, their biological material extracted through crude industrial methods. He Jin, commanding the Coalition's intelligence network, had been tracking these accelerated harvests with growing alarm. "They're prioritizing quantity over sustainability," she reported. "At current rates, they'll exhaust their remaining territory within 20 years. The realization led to a sobering conclusion. The Council was preparing for one final massive harvest operation. They would consume everything they could reach before their empire collapsed entirely. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Il-sung decided. "If we wait for gradual liberation, they'll destroy half the galaxy before they fall." Subin had been working toward this moment for years. As humanity's chief diplomat, she had maintained contact with resistance movements throughout Council space, building networks that could coordinate simultaneous action across thousands of worlds. "The Coalition is ready," she reported. "We have confirmed resistance cells on 93% of Council-held worlds. Signal the word, and we can trigger simultaneous uprisings across their entire empire." But Il-sung had something more dramatic in mind than simple rebellion. Humanity had developed technology that could end the Council's reign instantly, without the massive casualties that Galactic War would bring. "Prepare the truth broadcast," she ordered. The idea had been developing for decades. A transmission powerful, enough to reach every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously, carrying complete documentation of Council crimes along with proof that resistance was possible. Instead of fighting the Empire militarily, they would destroy it psychologically. The technical challenges were enormous. The broadcast array required exotic matter generators, faster-than-light communication networks, and processing power that exceeded the computational capacity of entire civilizations. But humanity had spent a century preparing for this moment. Min Jun, now chief engineer for the Coalition, had inherited his family's tradition of impossible engineering projects. "The transmission array is complete," he reported from the hidden facility in the Andromeda Void. "We can reach every communication device in Council space simultaneously." The array was massive, a network of quantum transmitters spanning 3 star systems, powered by the total energy output of 12 artificial suns. When activated, it would create a communication pulse visible from neighboring galaxies. But the technical achievement was secondary to the message itself. Hyojin had spent years compiling evidence of Council atrocities, documenting their true nature, and providing practical instructions for resistance. The broadcast would include genetic templates for anti-Council biotechnology, weapon specifications, and coordination protocols for galactic resistance. The psychological impact will be unprecedented, reported the Coalition's xenopsychology team. Most species have lived their entire evolutionary history under Council influence. Learning the truth about their situation will trigger massive social upheavals. Some species might collapse entirely when confronted with the reality of their situation. Others might turn violent, seeking immediate revenge against Council installations. The broadcast could save the galaxy, or it could plunge it into chaos that lasted for millennia. Il-sung felt the weight of 8 billion human lives, plus the trillions of beings across the galaxy who were depending on her decision. The easy choice would be to continue the gradual liberation, saving species one at a time while allowing the Council to harvest others. But the clock was still turning. Every day of delay meant more worlds consumed, more civilizations destroyed, more innocent beings processed into raw materials for Council consumption. "Initiate broadcast sequence," she ordered. Across 3 star systems, the transmission array began powering up. Exotic matter generators created impossible geometries in space-time, opening channels that bypassed normal physics entirely. The message would arrive simultaneously at every world in Council space, faster than light, impossible to intercept or block. In the Council's core territories, Xintal was dealing with the worst crisis in galactic history. Half the Empire had declared independence. Harvest operations were failing across multiple sectors, and the High Council was demanding explanations he couldn't provide. "Supreme Overseer," his aide Kexvel announced urgently, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the void regions. Something is powering up transmission equipment on a scale we've never seen." Xintal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. In his decades of service, he had learned to recognize the signs of species that had advanced beyond Council control. The energy readings suggested technology centuries ahead of anything in the Empire's arsenal. "Can we block the transmission?" he asked. "Negative," Kexvel replied. "The signal is propagating through subspace channels we can't access. Whatever they're broadcasting, it will reach every world in Council territory simultaneously." The transmission began at precisely 12 Vunkhao's Galactic Standard Time. Across thousands of worlds, billions of beings received the same message simultaneously. "Citizens of the galaxy, you have been deceived. The Galactic Council is not a confederation of peaceful species. It is a predatory empire that harvests sentient beings for resources. Your neighbors have not chosen to leave the Confederation. They have been consumed." The message included everything: intercepted Council communications discussing harvest quotas, technical specifications proving their true capabilities, genetic evidence of their parasitic nature, and detailed documentation of atrocities spanning 50 millennia. But most importantly, it included proof that resistance was possible. The human story, the coalition of hidden species, the successful evacuations and liberations. The galaxy was not helpless against Council predation. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On world after world, beings who had lived in fear of mysterious disappearances suddenly understood what was happening to their neighbors. Species that had been preparing to join the Confederation realized they were volunteering for extinction. Within hours, the Council's communication networks were overwhelmed with demands for explanation. Planetary governments were declaring emergency sessions. Defense fleets were receiving contradictory orders as local commanders chose sides in a conflict that suddenly engulfed the entire galaxy. Zintal watched his empire collapse in real time as reports flooded in from across Council space. "Rebellion on Veltros Prime," announced one aide. "The Karthak fleet has turned their weapons on our installations," reported another. 23 systems have declared independence in the past hour. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. The Council's power had always depended on keeping species isolated, preventing them from learning the true scale of the threat they faced. Now that isolation was shattered permanently, but the transmission had included something else: coordinates for safe worlds and instructions for contacting the Silent Coalition. Species that chose to flee their worlds rather than fight could find refuge with the Hidden Lion. Bora stood in her childhood bedroom in Seoul, but the room looked nothing like she remembered. Vines grew through the broken windows, and trees pushed up through the floor. Nature had reclaimed the house where she had learned her first alien languages over a century ago. She was old now, one of the last humans alive who remembered Earth before the Exodus. Her body was frail, kept alive by medical technology that the Council could never have imagined. But her mind was still sharp, still filled with the memories of humanity's greatest escape. "The Restoration Committee wants to rebuild the cities," said Il-sung, now serving as Earth's first planetary administrator in over a century. "They think we should make everything look like it did before we left." Bora shook her head slowly. "No. Let the planet heal. We're not the same species that left this world. We shouldn't pretend to be." 10 years had passed since the Council's empire collapsed. The galaxy was still recovering from 50,000 years of predation, but remarkable progress had been made. The new Galactic Assembly represented over 3,000 species, all working together to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than consumption. But humanity's relationship with Earth remained complicated. The planet that had been their home for millions of years was now a nature preserve and memorial to the species that had fled into the darkness. Some humans wanted to return permanently. Others believed Earth should remain untouched, a reminder of what they had lost and what they had gained. Il-sung walked to the window where Bora stood looking out at the overgrown streets. "The Assembly voted to make you the first human ambassador to the restored Council survivors. Are you interested?" Bora smiled at the irony. After spending her life helping humanity escape the Council's grasp, she was being asked to help the former predators rebuild their lives. Many Council species had been as trapped in the harvest system as their victims, forced to participate in atrocities to survive. "Some of them are genuinely sorry," she said quietly. "They were born into a system that required constant consumption. When that system collapsed, many of them didn't know how to live without harming others." The rehabilitation of former Council species was one of the most challenging aspects of the new galactic order. Some had embraced the change eagerly, sharing their advanced technology and helping to repair the damage their empire had caused. Others struggled with the transition from predator to citizen. Zintal was among those who had adapted successfully. The former Council overseer now worked as a historical researcher, documenting the crimes of his species while helping to ensure they would never be repeated. His testimony had been crucial in establishing the galactic protection protocols that prevented any future empire from using harvest tactics. "We were afraid," he had told the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. "For 50,000 years we believed that consumption was the only way to survive. The humans showed us that cooperation was not only possible, but more effective than predation." Yabin was leading the massive effort to rehabilitate worlds that had been damaged by council harvesting. Her teams used advanced human technology to restore ecosystems, rebuild civilizations, and help survivors reconnect with their cultural heritage. "We've made contact with over 40 species that were presumed extinct," she reported to the assembly. Many had small populations hidden in remote locations, keeping their cultures alive despite centuries of persecution. Each discovery brought new joy and new challenges. Species that had been hiding for millennia needed help rebuilding their societies. Others had evolved in isolation and required careful integration into the galactic community. The work was slow, but rewarding. Former harvest worlds were becoming thriving centers of trade and culture. Species that had been enemies under the council system were forming alliances and sharing knowledge. The galaxy was healing. Jeho had taken on the task of establishing the legal framework for the new galactic order. The silence protocols, based on humanity's own experience, gave every species the right to isolation if they felt threatened. No one could be forced to participate in galactic civilization against their will. "The right to disappear," he called it during assembly sessions. Every species must have the option to step away from galactic society if they choose. No empire, no matter how benevolent, should have power over unwilling subjects. The protocols also established strict limits on resource extraction and population management. The mistakes of the Council era could never be repeated if basic rights were protected by law. But perhaps the most important development was happening in human space itself. The species that had fled Earth as refugees had evolved into something unprecedented, a truly spacefaring civilization with no permanent homeworld and no fear of extinction. Young Su, born in deep space during the original Exodus, commanded one of humanity's exploration fleets. His ships pushed beyond the edge of the galaxy, seeking new worlds and making contact with civilizations that had never known the Council's influence. "We've found 17 species in the outer spiral arms," he reported to the Colonial Assembly. "All of them developed independently, without predation or harvest systems. Their societies are remarkably peaceful. These untouched civilizations provided hope for the galaxy's future. They proved that intelligent species could evolve without developing predatory behaviors, that cooperation was as natural as competition. Humanity had become the galaxy's teachers in this new art of peaceful coexistence. Their experience as both victims and survivors gave them unique insights into building sustainable relationships between species. Mi Jung, now serving as humanity's chief philosopher, had developed the theoretical framework that guided the new galactic civilization. "We learned something during our exile that the Council never understood," she explained to visiting diplomats. "Diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. Every species has something unique to contribute." The principle had become central to assembly policy. Instead of forcing conformity, the new order celebrated differences. Each species maintained its own culture, government, and territory while participating in voluntary cooperation networks. Back on Earth, Bora made her final pilgrimage to the ruins of the Geneva Embassy, where humanity had first encountered the Council's deception. The building was gone, overgrown with vegetation, but the memories remained clear. She remembered her father, Kehoe, who had died peacefully on New Terra 20 years earlier. His last words had been simple. We kept our promise. Humanity survived. Taemin had lived to see 97 years, spending his final decades training the next generation of intelligence analysts. His granddaughter Il-sung now led humanity's diplomatic corps, but she still used his methods for monitoring galactic communications. Nari had established the engineering academy that trained technicians from hundreds of species. Her innovations in stealth technology and faster-than-light travel had revolutionized galactic transportation. One by one, the original refugees were passing away, but their legacy lived on in the institutions they had built and the principles they had established. Bo-Ra walked to the place where her father's office had been, now marked only by foundation stones hidden beneath flowering vines. She had brought something with her, a small tree seedling from New Terra, genetically modified to thrive in Earth's recovering ecosystem. As she planted the tree in the rich soil, she thought about the journey humanity had taken. From a single world threatened with extinction to a galactic civilization dedicated to protecting life. From victims fleeing in the darkness to guardians ensuring no species would ever face harvest again. We never stopped being human, she whispered to the tree as she packed soil around its roots. That's why we won. The tree would grow slowly, like the civilization humanity was building among the stars. It would face storms and droughts, periods of growth and dormancy, but it would endure, carrying within its genetic code the memory of two worlds, the Earth that had given it birth and the New Terra that had shaped its evolution. Il-sung found her there an hour later, sitting peacefully beside the newly planted tree. The assembly is waiting for your answer about the ambassador position, she said gently. Bo-Ra looked up at her. This remarkable woman who had been born among the stars and grown up knowing only freedom. Tell them yes. Someone needs to help. The former council species learn what we learned during our exile. What's that? Bo-Ra smiled as she struggled to her feet, her ancient body protesting the movement. That survival isn't about consuming others. It's about growing together. As they walked back to the transport that would carry them to the spaceport, Bo-Ra took one last look at her childhood home. Earth would never again be humanity's only world, but it would always be there first. The planet that had given birth to a species stubborn enough to escape extinction and wise enough to ensure no other species would face the same threat. Behind them, the small tree swayed in the afternoon breeze, its leaves rustling with the sound of change. The clock that had started ticking with humanity's first breath on Earth was still turning, marking not the end of their story but the beginning of a new chapter. In the depths of space, human ships continued their endless journeys between the stars. In the halls of the Galactic Assembly, human diplomats worked to build a better future for all species. In laboratories and universities, a